The missed calls started at 6:47 the morning. I was standing in my commercial kitchen, flour on my forearms and the smell of brown butter filling the air, when my phone lit up on the stainless steel counter. 17 calls, all from the same contact I hadn't spoken to in 4 months. I set the phone face down, slid my pie out of the oven, and let it cool. That moment felt like something I had been quietly preparing for my whole life without knowing it. Let me take you back to where this really started. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house that always smelled like my mother's Sunday pot roast, an old carpet that needed replacing. My parents weren't wealthy, but they weren't struggling either. My father worked 31 years at a logistics company, and my mother taught 4th grade until her knees gave out. They raised 2 daughters. My sister is 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand what favoritism meant, I understood that it lived inside our house like a third parent. My sister was the one who got the car on her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass and a speech about building character. She got her college application fees paid, her dorm room furnished from scratch, and a monthly allowance my parents called support. I got a handshake and the advice to apply for scholarships, which I did, because I had no other choice. I don't say any of this with bitterness anymore. I say it because context matters, and what happened on Mother's Day last year cannot be understood without it. I had been running my baking business out of a rented commercial kitchen space for 2 years by then. It started as a side project during the worst stretch of my life. I had just lost my job as a marketing coordinator when the small agency I worked for dissolved overnight, and I had $600 in my checking account and a lease renewal coming up that I couldn't afford. I moved out of my apartment, put my things in a storage unit, and for 6 weeks I slept on an air mattress in the back of my friend's studio while I figured out what to do next. What I did was bake. I had always baked, the way some people run or paint or write in journals. It was the thing I did when the world felt too loud. I started making pies, fruit pies, savory pies, hand pies, custard tarts, and selling them at a farmer's market 40 minutes outside the city on Saturday mornings. I drove there in a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a heating system that worked on its own schedule. The first Saturday I made $80. The second Saturday I made $140. By the end of the first month I had a small following of regulars, a waiting list for Thanksgiving orders, and a name, Honest Crust. I never told my family any of this in detail. Not because I was hiding it, but because every time I had tried to share anything about the business in its early stages, the reaction had been the same. My mother would tilt her head the way she did when she was trying to be kind and say something like, "That's sweet, honey, but is that really a plan?" My father would look at my sister, who had a steady salary as a hospital administrator, and I could see in his face exactly what he thought about pie versus a benefits package. My sister herself was not cruel about it. She was something worse. She was indifferent. So I stopped sharing and started working. By the spring of last year, Honest Crust had a commercial kitchen lease, a part-time employee, a website that actually functioned, and a wholesale account with 3 local grocery stores. I was paying myself a modest salary. I had moved into a small apartment. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made headlines, just a person who had quietly built something real out of very little. Then I got a call from a woman named Deborah, who worked in the specialty food acquisitions department of a regional grocery chain with locations across 6 states. She had tried one of my pies at a food industry trade show where a friend had entered my product without telling me. She wanted to talk about a private label licensing deal. I did not tell my family about that call either. I called my attorney instead. I had found her the previous year after a minor contract dispute with a wholesale account, and she had become the kind of advisor I didn't know I needed. I told her what Deborah had said. She told me to say nothing to anyone outside of absolute necessity until the terms were on paper. I agreed. I signed a non-disclosure agreement the following week and we began negotiations. This was March. Mother's Day was in May. My mother had requested a brunch at her favorite restaurant, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a Sunday buffet that my father complained was overpriced every single time and still allowed my mother to book every year because he loved her. My sister flew in from Charlotte with her husband. I drove 40 minutes in the Civic with the cracked dashboard. We sat at a round table near a window and ordered mimosas and everything felt, for about 20 minutes, normal. Then my father cleared his throat the way he did before announcements. He said he and my mother had been doing some thinking. He said they wanted to do something meaningful for both of their daughters, something that reflected how proud they were of the women they had become. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not hope. More like the bracing feeling before something you already know is coming. He turned to my sister first. He and my mother were going to contribute $50,000 toward the down payment on the vacation property my sister and her husband had been looking at in the Outer Banks. A beach house. They had already spoken with a financial advisor. The paperwork was being handled. My sister put her hand over her mouth and her husband shook my father's hand, and my mother cried the particular way she cried when she was happy. Then my father turned to me. He said they wanted to give me something that would help me too. He reached into the inside pocket of his sport coat and pulled out a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note and a printout from a website. The note said they loved me and believed in me. The printout was a list of small business development workshops offered through the local library. Free admission. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 8 p.m. For a moment the table was quiet except for the ambient noise of the restaurant around us. My sister said, in the careful voice she used when she was trying not to make something worse, that the workshops sounded really useful and that she had heard great things about that kind of resource. My mother said she hoped I knew the gesture came from a place of love. I folded the printout, put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in my bag. I said thank you. I picked up my mimosa and took a long sip and looked out the window at the parking lot and thought about Deborah and the term sheet sitting on my attorney's desk and the non-disclosure agreement I had signed and the fact that I could not say a single word about any of it, so I didn't. We had brunch. I ate the eggs, Benedict, and I was polite and I drove 40 minutes home. 3 weeks later, my attorney called to tell me the licensing deal was finalized. Honest Crust would supply the private label line across 214 store locations. The contract was for 2 years with renewal options. The upfront licensing fee was $280,000. Ongoing royalties would be calculated quarterly. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after that call. Then I got up, called my accountant, called my attorney again, and began the process of setting up a proper business entity with the help of people who knew what they were doing. We established an LLC, opened a business account, and began the legal and financial structuring necessary to manage a contract of that size responsibly. My attorney had been clear from the beginning. Do not make large purchases. Do not change your lifestyle visibly. Do not discuss the deal publicly until it was fully executed and funds had cleared. I followed every piece of that advice. What I did do, quietly and without fanfare, was reach out to a commercial real estate agent my accountant knew. I told her what I was looking for. She sent me listings. One of them stopped me. The property had been on the market for a year and a half. It was a small commercial building on a side street in a neighborhood that had been gradually developing for the past 4 years. New restaurants, a roastery, a boutique fitness studio, the kind of slow urban migration that tends to get ahead of property values. The building had a ground floor retail space, a second floor apartment, and a small parking area. The previous tenant had operated a dry cleaning business there for 20 years, and the current owner, an elderly man in his 80s, had been trying to sell for some time without success. The asking price had been reduced twice. I made an offer. It was accepted. I did not tell my family. The closing happened on a Friday morning in late July. I signed the documents, shook hands with the seller's agent, and drove to my commercial kitchen where I had a production run scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. I made 42 pies that day. I listened to the radio. I thought about my grandmother, who had taught me to crimp a pie crust when I was 7 years old, who had always said that the most dignified thing a person could do was to make something with their hands and ask for nothing in return. I thought about the library printout still somewhere in my bag. August came. The grocery chain began stocking the private label line. There was no announcement, no press release, no social media post from me. The packaging just appeared on shelves in 214 locations across 6 states. The Honest Crust name was on it in small letters in the corner, as the licensing terms allowed. My sister found it. She was in a grocery store in Charlotte in mid-August, and she called me from the aisle. Her voice had a particular texture I didn't immediately recognize. Not quite anger, not quite excitement. something coiled and calculating underneath a surface of warmth. She said she had found my pies. She said she had no idea I had gotten this big. She said we needed to celebrate. I told her it was a licensing deal and that I was under non-disclosure for most of the specific details. She said she understood. She asked if the deal was going well. I said it was going fine. She said she was so proud of me and that she had always believed in my baking and that we should really plan a trip together soon. I said that sounded nice. I got off the phone and sent my attorney a message that said, "My family has found out about the grocery deal. Heads up." She replied, "Keep sharing minimal information. You haven't violated the NDA by acknowledging the product exists. Say nothing about financial terms or the building." I said nothing about either. What happened next happened fast. My sister called my mother. My mother called my father. My father called me that same evening, and his voice had the particular tone it took when he was performing a kind of warmth he needed something from. He said he was so proud. He said the family needed to get together and celebrate properly. He said my sister had mentioned that an opportunity like this probably meant I was in a position where I needed guidance, financial guidance, and that as my family, they wanted to be involved in making sure I made smart decisions. He said he and my mother might know some people who could help. I asked what kind of people. He said financial advisors, maybe investors, people who had experience with scaling small businesses. I said I already had an attorney and an accountant who were handling everything. He said family was different from professionals. I said I appreciated the thought. There was a pause. Then he said, carefully, that they had heard the licensing deal was significant. He wanted to know if I was thinking about the family, about what this could mean for all of us. He said that given everything they had done to support me over the years, it would be meaningful to know I hadn't forgotten where I came from. I was standing in my kitchen. I looked at the flour on my counter. I thought about the $50,000 beach house contribution. I thought about the library printout. I thought about 6 weeks on an air mattress. I thought about $40 in farmers market fees paid with crumpled bills I had pulled from a jar on a shelf. I told him I would always remember where I came from. I told him I loved him. I told him I had an early morning and I needed to get to sleep. After I hung up, I called my attorney. She had already been thinking about it. She told me there was nothing my family could legally claim. The business was mine, the contract was mine, the LLC was mine. Nothing had been co-signed, co-invested, or co-built. She said family members sometimes attempted informal pressure or, in more contentious situations, made claims based on alleged contributions. She asked if my family had ever given me money for the business. I said no. She said she was not concerned, but that I should document any conversations going forward and let her know immediately if the pressure escalated to anything in writing. It escalated. 2 weeks later, my sister texted me a long message. It said she had been talking to my parents and that the whole family was a little hurt that I hadn't included them in something so significant. It said that they had provided me with support my whole life in ways that maybe I didn't appreciate, and that now that I was doing well, it felt like I was pulling away. It said she didn't want money. She just wanted me to know that family mattered and that she hoped I would think about what it meant to share good fortune with the people who had always had my back. I forwarded the message to my attorney without replying. She replied, "Classic soft pressure. Do not engage with the substance. If you want to respond at all, keep it warm but vague. Something like, 'I love you all. I'll be in touch soon.'" I sent exactly that. My sister left it on read. In September, my parents announced they were coming to Columbus for a visit. My mother said she wanted to see my kitchen. I said that was fine and I would take them to lunch. What I did not say was that 2 weeks earlier I had signed the final documents on the commercial building and that my contractor had begun work on the ground floor, converting it into a proper retail bakery, and that the second-floor apartment, once renovations were complete, would be my new home. They arrived on a Saturday morning. My father shook my hand with both of his, the way he did when he was trying to establish warmth at the start of something. My mother hugged me for a long time. My sister had not come. She had sent a text saying she was sorry she couldn't make it and that she was thinking of me. I took them to my commercial kitchen. My mother touched the edge of the stainless steel prep counter gently, the way she touched things she was trying to assess the value of. My father asked about the lease terms. I said it was a monthly commercial agreement, which was true and also partial information, because I did not mention the building I owned 3 blocks away. We had lunch at a Thai restaurant nearby. My father talked about investments. My mother talked about a friend of theirs whose daughter had sold a business and made a series of poor decisions afterward that the whole family now had to manage the fallout of. It was not a subtle story. I ordered the green curry and let them talk. Over dessert, my father asked directly. He said he and my mother had been thinking seriously and that they believed the right thing, the family thing, was for them to have some formal role in the business going forward. Not a controlling role, he said quickly. Just advisory. Just something that reflected the fact that they were my family and that families supported each other. He mentioned the $50,000 they had given my sister. Not as an accusation, he said, but as an example of what it meant to them to invest in their children's futures. He said he supposed they had not always seen what I was building for what it was, and that maybe they owed me an apology for that, but that an apology and a new beginning was exactly what this could be. I put my fork down. I looked at my father and then at my mother, and I kept my voice completely level. I told them that I loved them and that I was glad they had come. I told them that Honest Crust was structured as a single-member LLC and that I had an attorney who handled all matters related to business relationships and that any formal inquiry would need to go through her office. I told them her name and spelled it out clearly. I told them I was not able to discuss the financial terms of any existing agreements. My mother said that sounded very cold for a family conversation. I said I was trying to be clear because I cared about them. My father asked if this meant the answer was no. I said the answer was that any formal proposal needed to go to my attorney. We finished dessert in a silence that sat over the table like weather. They drove back to their hotel. I drove to the building on the side street and stood in the gutted ground floor in the smell of fresh drywall and sawdust and thought about the fact that in 4 months, give or take, I would open the doors of a real bakery in a building I owned outright. I didn't hear from them for 3 weeks. Then the calls started coming at a pace I hadn't expected, not from my parents but from relatives I had barely spoken to in years. An aunt in Cincinnati who wanted to reconnect. A cousin who had always believed in me. My mother's older sister who said she had heard the most wonderful news and wanted to have me over for dinner. I was polite to each of them. I offered nothing. My attorney received a letter. It was from a person claiming to represent my family's informal interests, not a licensed attorney, it turned out, just a family friend with a notary certification who had apparently drafted something he believed carried legal weight. The letter suggested that my family had provided material and emotional support throughout my development as a baker and business person, and that this support entitled them to a share of proceeds from any enterprise that arose from said development. My attorney called me when she received it. There was a quality in her voice that I recognized as restrained amusement. She said it was not a legally actionable document. She said she would send a response on my behalf that was firm, professional, and final. She asked if I wanted to see it before she sent it. I said please. The response she drafted was 4 paragraphs long and stated clearly that my business had been built without any financial contribution from my family, that no agreement, verbal or written, had ever been made regarding any share of proceeds, and that any further correspondence of this nature would be treated as harassment and addressed accordingly. She sent it certified mail. The certified letter was received on a Tuesday. On that same Thursday, I got 17 calls before 7 in the morning. I was in the kitchen. I put the phone face down and slid my pie into the oven and let it cool. My mother left a voicemail that said she didn't understand why I was doing this to the family. My father left one that said he was disappointed. My sister left one that was very long and covered, in order. How hard it was to be the one always trying to hold the family together. How she had defended me so many times over the years. How she had never asked me for anything, and how this felt like a betrayal of everything families were supposed to be. I listened to all 3 voicemails once. I forwarded them to my attorney. Then I did not call back. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not make the decisions I made out of spite. I did not set up the LLC or hire the attorney or structure the business carefully because I was anticipating a confrontation with my family. I did those things because a woman named Deborah had called me out of nowhere about a licensing deal, and my attorney had told me to protect myself, and I had listened, because for the first time in my adult life, I had something real that was worth protecting. The fact that it also protected me from my family was not the plan. It was just the outcome of being careful. December came. The bakery was 6 weeks from opening. The contractor had finished the ground floor, and the second-floor apartment was nearly done. I had hired 2 full-time employees and a part-time weekend staff. I had a logo, a sign, a website, a soft opening date. I had been sleeping on an air mattress in the apartment above the bakery for 3 weeks while the bedroom was being painted, and I thought often about the other air mattress, the one in my friend's studio, and how that version of me had gotten up every morning and driven to a farmer's market in a car with a broken heater and made $80 and called it a start. My parents had not spoken to me in 6 weeks. My sister had sent one text in October that said simply, "I hope you're okay." I replied that I was well and hoped she was too. That was the last exchange. 2 days before Christmas, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was different from the calls in October, quieter. She said she and my father had been talking, really talking, not about the business, just about us, about the family, about the things they had gotten wrong over the years. She said she knew the library printout had been a mistake. She used that word, mistake, which was the closest she had ever come to an apology about the pattern of my entire childhood. She said she was sorry that they had not seen what I was building for what it was. She said she missed me. I sat with the phone pressed against my ear for a long moment. I told her I missed her too. I told her I was not interested in a relationship that was built around the business or the money. I told her that if she and my father genuinely wanted to reconnect, I was open to that, slowly, on terms that felt safe to me. I told her I loved her because I did. I also told her that I was not in a position to discuss anything business-related, that nothing about the structure of Honest Crust was going to change, and that if she could accept all of that, I would love to have her and my father come to my bakery opening in January. There was a silence. Then she said she would talk to my father. He called me the next morning. He said less than my mother had. He said he was proud of me, which was the first time he had said those words to me without something attached to the end of them. He said he would like to come to the opening if the invitation stood. I told him it stood. My sister called on Christmas Eve. She asked if we could start over. I told her I didn't know what starting over meant, but that I was willing to have a conversation, and that a conversation was not a business negotiation, and that if she could keep those two things separate, I thought we had a chance. She said she could try. I said trying was enough. They all came to the opening. My parents, my sister, her husband. They stood in the bakery I owned, in the building I owned, in a neighborhood that had increased in value since I had purchased it, and they ate pie off paper plates, and my mother cried, and my father shook my hand and told me it was beautiful, and I believed him. None of them knew the building was mine. I hadn't told them, and they hadn't asked. The sign said Honest Crust. The menu was handwritten on a chalkboard. The smell was butter and brown sugar and the particular warmth of an oven that had been running since 4 in the morning. My grandmother's pie crust recipe was framed on the wall near the register. I had put it there on purpose. She had written it on a note card in her careful cursive 40 years ago, and my mother had saved it in a kitchen drawer and given it to me when I turned 20. One of the few things she had ever given me without giving my sister the same thing first, because she said she just knew it belonged to me. I looked at it sometimes when the days were long. I thought about what she had told me the summer before she died, when I was 12 and she was 81, and we were standing in her kitchen with flour on our forearms, crimping the edge of a crust the way she had shown me 100 times. She had said, "Nobody can take from you what you built with your own hands, baby. The only thing they can do is try." I had not understood it then. I understood it now. The missed calls were still in my phone. All 17 of them, from October, unanswered. I never deleted them. I kept them the way you keep a receipt for something expensive, not because you need it anymore, but because there is something grounding about the proof that it happened, that you were there, that you held your ground, and it cost something, and you paid it anyway. The bakery opened on a Wednesday in January. By Friday, we had sold out of everything we'd made. By the following week, there was a line out the door before we unlocked it. I stood behind the counter on that first Saturday morning, my hair pulled back, flour on my forearms, the same as always. I slid a pie out of the oven. I set it on the rack to cool, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be.